Welcome to Push to Be More. My name is Matt Edmondson. I'm going to be your host for today, and today's podcast is going to be a little bit different. But before we get into that, let me just say a very warm welcome to you. If this is your first time with us, do like and subscribe. And also, obviously, you can find out more information on the website, pushtobemore.com. You can find all the past episodes and all the information there, all the links, all the transcripts, everything are on the website. So pushtobemore.com if you want to find out more about the show. But it's great to see you. Great if you're a regular. Thanks for coming back. I am talking to the wonderful Sadaf Beynon, who, if you are a regular to the show, you might recognize that name, because normally at the end I go, the wonderful team that makes this show possible includes and I usually come up with some kind of descriptive word, dynamic. I can't even remember what I say now. I'll just make it up on the spot. But the amazing person,
but they're all true, right?
They're all true. The amazing person, which is Sadaf Beynon, who is sat next to me. So I'm going to explain why this is a little bit different and why we have Sadaf on the podcast in just a few minutes. But before we get into that, should we do the show sponsor?
Yes, we should. You should.
I should. I just want you to know Sadaf produces the show, hence the reason why I'm asking her what I should actually do. But yes, thank you to today's show sponsor, which is Podjunction. Podjunction makes it possible for you to have your own podcast. And if you're a leader or a CEO, I'm convinced personally that podcasting is such a good thing for you to do. Hence the reason why we do it. It's just a remarkable networking tool. And if you want to know more about how it all works, obviously you can check out podjunction.com. There is a podcast called Podjunction, which you and I both do.
That's right.
Because Sadaf heads up Podjunction. And so you can listen to that. All the tips and tricks are on the podcast. Of course, Podjunction has its own services, which we would love to sell you, if I'm not being too cheeky. But you can find out more at podjunction.com. But yeah, seriously, you don't need any tech experience. You don't need to worry about that whole thing. We'll help you with all of that. But just to get you up and running and get your podcast going, I was saying to somebody the other day, I can't remember who I was talking to. He'll come back to me. I can picture his face as well. But we were talking about podcasting and how he's used it to grow his business from 400 grand a month to 1.2 million. And all he does is he does the strategy which we talk about. He talks about going and finding your ideal guests, invite them onto your podcast. That's it. You have a great conversation with them. You have a follow-up strategy, and bish, bash, bosh. He's more effective than any salesman. And it's quite extraordinary, actually, the difference it made to his business. And it's the same strategy we use. It's the same strategy we advocate on so many things. Now, don't get me wrong. There are different strategies, different nuances. I get it. So if you want to know more, check out Podjunction. That'll help you every step of the way, especially this wonderful lady here. If you're watching the video. If you're listening to the audio, you cannot see me waving. There we go. So today is a little bit different, right, on the Push podcast. We are in a different studio. For one, if you're watching the video, not many people watch the video compared to listen, but that's okay. We don't take it personally, but we like to do the videos as well. But we are in our studio down at the office, as opposed to I'm often in the studio at my home because I normally record the Push podcast late at night. That's where most people seem to be able to do them. But you're going to become a Push podcast host.
That's right.
Did I say that right?
Yeah.
It just didn't sound right in my head. You are going to be one of the hosts of Push to Be More. And so we get so many requests to be on the show. It's crazy, actually. And there's so many people that we want to talk to. Again, we use the same strategies. Go find your ideal guest and talk to them on the show and have a great conversation. So I am doing 5 podcasts at the moment, I think. 4 or 5.
4 or 5, yeah.
I can't remember. I'd lose count. Anyway, most of my time is spent podcasting, so I physically can't do that many more. But Sadaf is actually a great podcast host. If you listen to the Podjunction podcast, then you'll know what I mean. So I wanted to introduce Sadaf to you in this show. So say hello.
Hi.
The lady behind the camera that makes all the magic happen is now starting to come in front of the camera. And I thought the best way to introduce you to everybody would be for you to be a Push to Be More guest.
Cool.
So we're going to do that. The only thing that I can't do is question box because I don't have it with me. That's the home studio.
Yeah.
So I'm going to get, I'll probably get AI to give me a question.
Okay.
But if you had a podcast, let's start with the opening question. Well, you do have a podcast, but if you could have anybody on the podcast, past or present, that's had a really big impact on your life, who would it be and why?
It would be my dad.
Your dad?
Yeah.
And why your dad?
My dad was just a wonderful man, and he's passed away now. But I have learned so much from him growing up. I was very close to him.
Yeah. Your daddy's girl.
Sorry?
Were you a daddy's girl?
I was, yeah. I was far from the perfect child. There was 4 of us siblings. For most of my growing up, younger years, I was the black sheep of the family, always getting in trouble for stuff. But my dad, he was just so gracious, so patient. And he had this amazing way of just coming alongside and walking me through things, talking me through things rather than, with the wagging finger and the, I mean, I got in trouble and I had my, I got my consequences. But and I just grew really close to Dad, I think, as a result of that. Yeah. And he spoke into my life on many levels, and it would be him.
I'm curious then if I can ask this, and no pressure because we've not planned this at all. This is all very spontaneous. And normally when a guest comes on the show, we give them a heads up that the only thing we say to a guest is, listen, just so you know, this is the first question we're going to ask you, right? So we didn't have that conversation, so I appreciate I'll just drop this on you. But I'm curious, what would you want to ask your dad on the podcast that you didn't get a chance to ask him before he passed away?
After he passed away, I had no regrets. I had many opportunities to say everything I wanted to say, to ask everything I wanted to ask. I think since he's passed, I've had, I had 2 boys that were still very little when he died. And as they're growing up and as I'm parenting them and wanting to also be that spiritual input into their life, I wish I could ask Dad questions about that kind of stuff.
Or even just send your kids to your dad.
Yeah. That would be
That would be easy.
That would be ultimate, yes.
Yeah, fair play. Yeah. Fair play. It's interesting, actually, having done however many episodes we've done now of Push, because it's fair to say we've not asked that question to every guest. It took us a little while to realize this was a great question to ask. Yeah. And then we did it at the end of the show, and it always felt rushed. So then we moved it to the start of the show, and it always starts a really interesting conversation, I think. But I've not actually written it down in like a chart. I can't give you stats, but anecdotally, in my head, I can say the most popular answers to that question. I think the most popular answer is Dad. I know Tony Robbins is fairly popular. I know Jesus is fairly popular. But Dad tends to be the answer that most people give. And it's usually a case of Dad died too young, right? And there's just this section of life where we miss Dad and that input from Dad. And I find it deeply fascinating. The whole father thing, the whole children growing up in fatherless, what's the phrase they use now? Not fatherless, absent fathers, distant fathers. I can't remember what the phrase is, but do you know what I mean? Where dads aren't actively involved in the home. And I think the impact that has on society is quite extraordinary. And the whole thing fascinates me. And so I'm intrigued, the whole thing. I have no findings on this. I have no, what's the word I'm looking for? I have no theory that's come out of this, no research paper. All I can tell you is there's a lot of people who would like to have spent more time with their dad. And I think that's a really interesting term. Yeah. But your boys are great.
Yeah, I think so.
Their dad's great.
Yeah, I think so.
He's a cool guy. So full disclosure, Jeff, your husband, comes around my house and watches the football.
Yes, he does.
And he's actually started bringing Hudson a lot.
Yeah, he has.
who told me, he's 11 years old, he told me he couldn't have a beer the other day. When we were watching the football, do you want a drink? He's like, well, I can't have a beer. I was like, I wasn't actually offering you a beer. Just to be totally clear, because your dad sat right there. That was really funny. Very, very funny. So, obviously, the way we do the show, as you have told many people on the podcast, because you've done all the pre-call.
That's right, yeah.
And so if you've been a guest on the show, you will recognize Sadaf. You'll recognize her voice. And the pre-call, just so if you're listening, this is basically where we kind of pre-check the guest, don't we?
Yeah.
We have a conversation with them before just to make sure they're going to be a fit for the podcast. Well, you do. Ruthless. She calls a lot. No, I'm just joking. If you're thinking, should I be a guest on the podcast, you'll get on fine with Sadaf. But I'm intrigued, right? We talk about the three pillars, in effect, to the podcast, the three pillars of questions. I'm giving away all the secrets. Now, if you've not figured it out, I'm really sorry. I ask questions around three content areas: the push, to be, and more, right? Hence the name of the podcast. So where you've had to push through, what you do to be, to recharge your batteries.
Yeah.
And then more, what does growth look like? So challenge-wise, where have you push, what's your answer to that? Where have you had to push through? What challenge have you had to face that you've had to come through that you want to share on the podcast?
Yeah, okay. So you're talking about where I've had a challenge and I've pushed through and I'm on the other side. Okay. Wow. Okay. So I know I do the pre-calls. I wasn't prepped for this quite.
You should have done a pre-call with yourself.
Yeah, I should have. Okay. I guess I'll just talk about my dad a little bit more. So that was a challenge. He got diagnosed with lung cancer. Actually, it's going to be 10 years ago that he died, coming up in a few months. And so that was a big shock to the family. And it's challenging.
Was it a shock because he was quite a healthy guy?
Yeah, and he never smoked. Yeah. There was nothing like that in his history, but I think it was just secondhand smoke. And he was living in Pakistan too, where it's very polluted. So that was very difficult, watching him go through that. It was a very intense time because it was stage 4 when we figured out that it was in his system. And I was here in England. Yeah. And my other siblings were spread out around the world too. My brother was at home with my parents in Pakistan anyway. And we all had to kind of make our way there. And while we were making our way there, my mom passed away in a car accident. Wow. With my elder sister who had just arrived from Canada. So my mom passed away. My sister was badly injured. So there was lots going on. It was a real intense time actually for us as a family. And the challenge, I think, was to kind of keep our heads above water while we had young kids to look after, and also wanting to be there for the family. But, the Lord was very good to us. He is still very good to us. And he gave us what we needed to get through each day, through each moment, and carried us through it all. And I think all those things that we were able to pull out of ourselves to enable us to get through that time. I think a lot of it comes down to our parents having instilled those values into our lives since we were very little, and teaching us about what's important in life, like putting God first, having that relationship with him, growing up with that. So then when trouble strikes, you've got an anchor already. So I would credit that to them, I think. And so it's been a walk.
No doubt. It's fascinating. I mean, in one sense, you're flying to Pakistan because you know your dad's dying, right? And you're close to your dad. I'm assuming you were close to mum as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And close to your parents, good close family. The safety of your mum is not in your head, right? At this point, you're thinking about your dad and going over to him and dealing with the emotion of that, going, actually, he's barring a miracle. This man is sort of passing through to the other side, and you have to deal with that. But in the middle of that, you don't get a chance to say goodbye to your mum. And so she was taken in an instant in an unplanned way, whereas your dad died because of cancer. And as morbid as it sounds, it's kind of, Sharon and I have these conversations on occasions, like which way is better, right? Because if you know that you're going to die, people get to say goodbye, you get to say all the things that you want to say. But there's often pain usually involved in that. Whereas if someone dies unexpectedly or instantly, there's no pain. But you're like, hang on a minute, there's all these things that I didn't say or do. How did you deal with that?
With mom, you're right. It was so unexpected, really not on our radar at all. I was able to speak with her the night before. She had phoned to ask about something, and I was the one she phoned on my phone, and I was talking to Dad, giving the answers. And then I just said, love you, Mom. Good night. See you. And so I kind of felt like I said that much, at least. It was a see you later, bye kind of thing.
It wasn't an argument.
No, there wasn't an argument.
Yeah.
It was all good. And, I will see her. I will see her again. I know that. But at the time, you just think like, why? Why does this have to happen? And I think there's a lot, like I was saying earlier, about being able to talk to Dad. Again, with Mom, there's no regrets either, because I think we had very open relationships, so we always just talk quite openly as and when we needed to. So there wasn't anything that was left unsaid.
Yeah.
And so that helps. But again, like all these years later, as you're parenting, especially with Mom, it's like, well, how did you do this when we were little? How did you put up with this? What, all these kinds of things.
Yeah.
And I would love to be able to pick up the phone to her and to be able to ask her all kinds.
No doubt. I would, without being too jokey, I would actually like to talk to your mum about some of the recipes. Because some of the food that you've made passed down by your mum is extraordinary. And I think it is a really interesting one, isn't it? And the lessons I think you can learn from this, because I don't know which way I'm going to go. Obviously, I can't see into the future, and that I don't have those godlike powers yet. I wish eBay would start selling them. Jeff Bezos on Amazon, you can buy them. But none of us know. But what I do know is at some point I'm out of here.
Yeah.
Right. And that could be today. That could be, hopefully it isn't, genuinely, but
I hope it's not today.
There's certain things I still want to do, but living a life in such a way where there's no regrets. Maybe no regrets is the wrong phrase, because I think we all have regrets, but living a life in such a way that doesn't take life for granted is maybe a better way to put it. I think is a hell of a challenge.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? In the sense that I want to make sure every time I talk to my kids, I'm not thinking this could be the last time that I talk to them, because that would be very morbid, wouldn't it? Freak the kids out slightly. But at the same time, I don't want anything to be unsaid with them. Same with Sharon, my wife. Same with, my mum, my dad. Just, you kind of think.
Yeah.
And so I guess having gone through that now, what have you learned from that kind of impacts the way you live at the moment?
Yeah. Keeping short accounts, I think is what I would say to that. And being in the moment, being able to voice things that need to be said. And sometimes there are uncomfortable things that need to be said, but it's important to say them. And of course, with a lot of grace, because sometimes in the moment you shouldn't just open your mouth. I've learned that too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think holding short accounts. And I think one of the things with mom and dad in particular, and even with the rest of my family, we're kind of spread out around the world. And so having those opportunities when we talk and saying the things that need to be said is quite important for us, because we're not always in each other's faces.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, you've got a sister in Canada, a brother in Australia.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So 2 sisters in Canada. Yeah.
Okay, well, geez.
Yeah.
Although one of them's coming to the UK.
Yay! Just for a visit.
For a whole few days.
Yeah.
So you're quite close as a family, but you are spread out.
Yeah.
You collectively have shared in the tragedy of your mum and your dad, and you were all quite close to them. Mm-hmm. And I remember speaking to your brother on a different podcast about his story and digging into that, which I thought was quite fascinating, to seeing the whole thing from
his perspective,
from his perspective a little bit, which I thought was quite fascinating. So how do you deal with that as a family? You are close, but you are an international family.
Yeah. Like you said, it was a shared experience, and so that was actually really helpful. And talking about how we were feeling, and again, that came quite naturally to us to talk like that with each other. So I think that really helped, because you process things a lot more than you're actually realizing. Like every time you open your mouth to talk about, oh, I had a dream about mom, or, I went into this place, I saw this, and it reminded me of dad. Yeah. All of those things, it's all processing. And I think it's important, because grief has this way of kind of creating a crater in your life. And it doesn't actually ever go away. I think people think, oh, just give it time and you'll heal. It doesn't actually go away. I think you adapt. You learn to live with this crater. And then your siblings or whoever it is that you've had that shared experience with, they're the only ones who can understand really what that looks and feels like. Yeah. And so it's actually a real blessing to be able to have those opportunities. Because I think, like, even my husband doesn't understand really how it feels. Like, he can, like how I feel about it. He can get a good idea, but it's never going to be as same as how my sister understands it.
Yeah, that's fair enough. So how do you guys talk a lot? Are you like intentional in staying connected, or is it a case of
we try.
Once in a blue moon?
We try. Now that my brother's moved to Australia, he was living and working in Pakistan for a while. And with the time zones, it's really difficult. So it's either like I'm staying up late, or he's staying up late, or my other sisters are staying up late. And so we kind of take it in turns. But when we can, and once we get talking, it like goes on for hours. It's like, just hold that, I gotta go make a tea. Just hold that, I gotta take a pee break. It's just, it's hard to get off then once you get going.
Yeah, fair play. Fair play. Well, we should definitely get your sisters onto the podcast. Maybe I could talk to everybody. I get a full, complete picture of the Beynon massive, as we like to call it. So so given all of that, then, and the keep short accounts, and the way that works, do you see it impacting your style of parenting? Do you see? Maybe a better question here is: do you see when you parent your kids, you just stop and smile to yourself because it's like, oh, that's what mum did, or that's what dad did? Even when I was, I know when I grew up, my mum, because my parents got divorced when I was young, I was predominantly living with my mum, and the way she would do things, sometimes I'd find myself, I'm never going to do that with my kids when I'm older. Yeah. And of course I find myself doing exactly the same thing. So I'm curious, do you see that, you do things that just remind you of your mum and dad?
Yeah, I do. And I think a lot of those values just kind of been instilled in us without us realizing, because we were rebelling against it for most of the time, like hating it, or just being like, oh, do we have to? Yeah. But you still do it. And then you end up, it just becomes natural to you. So then you it just carries on, doesn't it?
Do you see your kids rebelling in the same way?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I do. And I often think like, he's just like me.
So do you think to yourself, well, I've sown and reaped there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I'm very good at it sometimes with my kids, but I can definitely see it in other people's kids where they act a certain way, and the parents are slightly exasperated, and I'm like, where do you think they got that from? Because you do the same thing, dude. Or I knew them when they were like my brother and his daughter, and just like, well, you were like that when you were younger, and you're criticizing her for that, and he's like, yeah, but it's different. I'm like, no, how? But it becomes this ever-repeating cycle. And I've said to my kids, I said, listen, all those things that you said, I'll never do that. You're going to totally do that. You're going to have these bizarre sort of flashbacks. And it is what it is. It's a part of the circle of life, to quote The Lion King. But yeah, that intrigues me. That intrigues me. So what do you do then? You say you live with this cradle, you learn to adapt. What have been some of the ways that you've adapted, or what are your coping mechanisms?
Yeah. I don't know what my coping mechanisms are, but I'll tell you what I do. We talk about mom and dad. We talk about them.
Do you find that helpful?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, it's just they were a normal part of our life, and so we keep them as a normal part of our life. And we can't like pick up the phone to them, but when my kids do funny things or they remind me of something that happened when I was younger, I always tell them, "Oh, this happened, and mom and dad did this," and sometimes be like, "Oh, I wish we could meet them," or there's something. So we keep them alive, we keep their memory alive, and I think that's important.
Yeah,
I think that is helpful. I think it brings some kind of healing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that Sharon's grandmother did, she passed away a few years ago now. I can't remember exactly how many years, but it was a few years ago. She passed away, a real fascinating lady. But as is quite often the way with your grandparents, you don't really know them. Yeah. You know them a little bit, but you don't, because I don't really remember my grandparents other than my single, I only really remember one grandmother growing up because all my other grandparents had passed away, either before I was born or very early on into my life. And I remember my grandmother, sweet old lady who would always drink way too much sherry at Christmas and just be asleep by sort of 2:00. And the one time of the year she go, "I love you," was when she'd had 3 sherry. "Oh, I love you, but you're so lovely." I was like, "All right, Nan, sit down before you fall over." But when I was growing up, Nan was like, I don't know if you were like this with if you had grandparents, but I was like, she is proper ancient. Do you know what I mean? It's like mum and dad were old, but my Nan, she's like proper ancient. And of course, I'm from a generation where my grandparents were part of the Second World War, right? And they had that sort of commonality. I never took the time, which I regret, while she was alive, to ask her all the stories. And Sharon, what she did a few years ago with her grandfather and grandmother was she sat down and said, "Right, tell me all the stories." And she made all the notes, and she became fascinated about the lives of her grandparents. And her grandmother actually wrote a book about her life called Sought and Found, I think. I can't remember what it was called. It was a really fascinating book just about the story of her life, about what it was like for her growing up in the war and all that sort of stuff. And I think, what a wonderful gift.
Yeah, it is.
Because I think I guess my kids know me. And with the fact that I do these podcasts and that I'm often quite in the public light telling them stories and go, "Oh, that's that story again, isn't it?" And I'll quite often, I remember my dad would say to me when I was younger, when I was growing up, this was this, and I go, I'm not interested. What part of you thinks I'm interested? I wouldn't actually say this, but I just wasn't interested. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I don't care. That was in the 60s. Why would I care about that? I'm in the 80s. What's wrong with you? And so, but now I kind of go, well, actually, I want to know, you know? And so this whole legacy thing, I thought was a wonderful thing that Sharon's grandparents or Sharon's grandmother did, was to write this book and to leave this legacy. And I think, I guess I don't know why I'm saying all this, but how do you know your mum and dad, you know their stories, but your kids don't.
Yeah.
And getting to know them, obviously, they're not interested. I mean, it's not possible, but if they were around, they probably wouldn't be that interested anyway because they're young. But at some point, they become interested. How do you keep that legacy? How do you keep that memory going?
Yeah. So one, as I said, like talking about it with them. The other thing I am working on very slowly is actually writing something down for mum and dad. When dad was very ill and he was coming to the end of his time, I don't know, I didn't mention this, but he was the director of a hospital. And so he had he was very much in the limelight as well, knew a lot of people and across Pakistan and missionaries too. And so actually someone put together this great book where all these people were sending in tributes.
Oh, wow.
To him. And so they talked about their, like how they knew him, their relationship with him, how he spoke into their life, so on and so forth. And someone compiled it all into a folder for us and made copies for all of us siblings. So I have that as a starting point, which is really nice. Yeah. So I want to do something with a bit more background about dad and with mom, and that's
That'd be
coming
amazing.
slowly.
Have you taken the kids to the ancestral home?
Yeah, Hudson's been there. Lincoln went when he was like, I don't know, 12 months old. That's when dad was dying. Right. And we haven't been back. And he has no memories, of course.
Of course.
Yeah.
But would you take them back?
I don't know. You know, going back home was always about mom and dad. That was why we went. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe when they're older and they want to see it for themselves, then sure, but not now.
Right. Fair enough. It's I've never actually been to Pakistan. It's definitely on my list of places to go, mainly because of the food. I'm not going to lie. I'm just going to go and eat. That's what I'm going to do. Look at the mountains. But like I know I can look at the records and I can see the house that my grandparents grew up in is written in the census, right? Because in Britain we have these records which tell me where he was at certain points of time. Yeah. I just don't know what do I need to go there? I don't know. It's in Sheffield. It's not exactly far. Do you know what I mean? It's not like an exotic other country. And I can see the house on Google Streets. You know, it's not like I can just knock on the door and say, "Do you mind if I come in?" Yeah. Because my granddad grew up in this. Do you mind if I have a look at it? They'd be like, "What?" It'd just be a bit odd, wouldn't it? But the reason I asked, I was just curious because obviously you grew up in a very different culture to Sheffield.
Yeah, I think though, I think it is important for the kids to see the culture. I do agree with that, and I think that is important. But I think selfishly, I don't want to go to Pakistan. I think, like I said before, if they're not there, but I think it is good for them to see, and also not just Pakistani culture, just any culture outside of what they're growing up in. I think it helps them to be a bit more well-rounded.
Because you grew up in Pakistan, moved to Canada, hence the accent, international school in Canada, married a guy in Liverpool, Scouser, who's just is a great guy, but very different cultures, very different backgrounds. So your kids are mixed race, right? How do you, or are you intentionally creating with them like that cultural aspect of your life? You know, this is part of who you are. You need to realize this and remember this. That's something I've never had to contend with. My wife's from the South and I'm from the North. It's not really the cultural differences on the same scale, but I'm kind of curious how you manage that between you and Jeff.
I think we just do life from like, I'm not intentionally trying to put something in front of them. I do teach them various words in Urdu. because then we can talk without other people knowing what we're saying.
And I bet the kids love that. It's
They
like
do
the
love that.
secret code language.
Yes.
Even Dad doesn't get it.
Yeah. And
What
so,
kind of things do they say?
well, one of the first things I taught them when they were quite little was boogers in their nose. So you can tell them you need to like clean your nose without anyone else knowing what you're saying and them getting embarrassed. So that was one of them. And then there's always take your shoes off, because that's a rule in our house. So that's juthi is the word for shoes. So they know that word very well. But yeah, Jeff too, he's like, oh, teach me some words too. So yeah, we're all in it together.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're definitely keeping the food culture.
Yes, the food culture, and some words where I can. I think it's probably the main things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair play.
That's my heritage right there.
Have your kids had to deal with any form of racism?
No, I don't think. Not yet, anyway. Not yet.
Have you prepared them for that, or have you not really?
I haven't really. It's one of those, like, do you
know how
draw
you would-
attention to that, or
Yeah.
do you leave it? I don't know. Yeah. I mean, when they're little and they go to school and they just come back with a whole bunch of paper with drawings on it, like that seems to like be the only thing they've done at school. But anyway.
And if their teachers are listening, you are wonderful people.
And then actually, this is good, actually. So they would come back with drawings of the family.
Yeah.
And there would be, I was the obvious one who was with like colored in brown with black hair, and the rest of them. And I said, oh, so who's this? And he's like, well, that's Hudson because he's peach. And that's Dad, he's peach. And this is Lincoln, he's peach. And you're brown. So it's just like, okay. So they obviously see themselves the same as their dads because they're all the same coloring.
They're not.
They're not, but that's how, like in the picture, they're all the same.
Yeah.
But that's how they see it.
Right.
So they see themselves as just as anyone else around them. They don't see themselves like they know I'm different. But it's interesting, in their head, they're white.
It's interesting. They're more like the boys tend to be their dads, though, don't they? They want to be more
which
like
is
their
good.
dads.
Which is good.
Well, I was going to say, how do you feel about this?
I love it.
Yeah.
I think it should be that way.
It doesn't bother you?
No, I mean, I have a really sweet relationship with both of them. And I love what I have, but I think as boys, they should want to be more like their dad.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Really interesting. I have a really good friend who his dad's passed away. His dad was from Bangladesh and his mum was Scottish.
Yeah.
He has never once, as long as I've known him, identified with his Scottish heritage. or the fact that his mum was white. But he does massively identify with the fact his dad was from Bangladesh. And that he is mixed race, and that he has a really big heart for the Bangladeshi community.
Yeah.
He loves the food, and do you know what I mean? There's certain aspects of it that he absolutely adores. But it is interesting how he totally went towards the side of his dad rather than his mum. And I often would say to him, but you're half Scottish, bro.
No, I'm not.
He's like, no. And that's no disrespect to our Scottish listeners, but for him, it's just a really big thing with his dad. And that really fascinated me.
Yeah. They don't like that. They're from, like, if you tell them you're Scouse, they don't like that.
Okay.
No, they don't like that.
Why
they
not?
want to, they just don't. They just find some parts about being Scouse weird.
Yeah.
Not that they see that in their dad.
Yeah.
It's not that.
Who is Scouse?
Who is Scouse, but they don't see that in him. But yeah, it's just funny. But they'll be like, yeah, but I've got family in Canada, so and my mom doesn't sound like that. So it's just
That's fascinating.
I think they pick and choose what they like and don't. I guess they can.
Well, that's what we all do when we grow up. I like that bit, but I don't like that bit. I like chocolate, I don't like broccoli.
Exactly that.
That's exactly what happens. Yeah. Okay, so to be then, how do you've got two kids. You've obviously I mean, you're living in Liverpool. You are can I dare say, an import? You know.
Yeah, you can call me an import.
I ask guests all the question all the time. Are you you're an import, but it's one of those where it's a city you've lived in. It's not the city you grew up in. It's not your culture. You've got Jeff, who is a legend of a guy, a very strong Liverpool fan. And you've got two young kids who are just really good fun. I have to be honest, I love your kids. They're amazing fun. But Lincoln especially is like the Energizer Bunny.
Yes.
That kid could recharge the sun. If it ever ran out of power, just plug him in and it would. So how do you in the midst of all of that, the business of work, family life, you are living in a different country to what you know. How do you recharge? How do you make you better in terms of your own strength and
what I don't have is the luxury of time. I can tell you that.
Yes.
So finding times where I can recharge is not easy. And what I'm realizing is that it looks different. It can look different to what it used to be like when I did have the luxury of time.
Yeah.
And I think I'm coming to terms with that a lot more.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it actually can just be me and my coffee in the morning. And I can use that time to even if it's just 10 minutes, I need to just maximize what I have rather than thinking, okay, no, I need an hour for just me to just, sit and be. But actually, no, 10 minutes can be maximized if I can do that. And it's like I used to love reading and having like loads of time to just lie in bed and read or lounge on the couch and read. And that doesn't really happen anymore. Yeah. But it just looks different now. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's interesting in terms of maximizing the 10 minutes because I remember when our kids were little, and you're right, the luxury of time, it just disappears. It does come back. It's the most extraordinary thing. And you do go through these seasons, I find, in life. And the season of kids, young kids, I always found with my kids that it just got better and better. It was just more and more fun because their personalities developed, and you go from being a parent to being a parent/mate,
friend,
which I find a quite fascinating transition. But like you, it's always easy to go, I just need more time. I just need more time, rather than focusing on what you don't have, focusing on what you can do with what you have.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not ideal. We can all sit there and go, yeah, it's not ideal, but it is what it is. So you like to read. Yeah. So if you had 4 hours just magically just sort of appear, what would you do? Do you work out? Or would you just sit and read? Go to a spa?
If I could, I would go for a walk. I'd go find some mountain to climb. That's what I would do.
So have you got a big love for the outdoors?
I do. I'm not like a hardcore hiker or anything like that. Don't get me wrong, but I would easily just, grab a water bottle and some headphones and just go for a walk.
Just go for a walk.
Yeah. Yeah. In the mountains, not like around the streets of Liverpool, because that's not relaxing.
Kind of take your life into your own hands a little bit. Dodging all the cars that have run the red lights. Although you live near Crox's Park.
I do, yeah.
Do you find that's a nice place to go walk around?
No, not really.
Don't pull any punches.
Yeah.
I have this route where from my house I can walk into town, and there's the quick way, which is a 40-minute walk. If I just walk down, the
main street,
the main road.
Yeah.
But if I walk an hour and 40 minutes, I can practically walk through a whole bunch of parks and through some old architecture.
Yeah.
And, some.
Cool.
So you go down through Sefton Park. You go through. I don't know if you've ever been down near St Michael's, the old train station in Egbert. And then you're on the river, and then you can walk along the river into town.
That's cool.
Oh, it's lovely. But it's an hour and 45 minutes. And so you just can't be in a rush to get to town.
Yeah.
But I like you, I kind of, people say to me, are you a beach person or are you a mountain person? I'm like, I'm both. This is why Canada appeals to me in so many ways. I could be in the mountain 1 minute and I can be on the beach the next.
Absolutely.
But it's that kind of, there is something quite awe-inspiring. I love to get up into the Lake District.
Yeah.
And so I've just, this weekend actually, I've just got it done. Got the bed fitted into my van so I can sleep in it finally. But yeah, the idea, I'd like to go up the Lake District, sit in the lakes, walk in the lakes, work in the lakes. It's just a beautiful part of the world. And I get how that would recharge your batteries or fill your tank, as Julie Conley would say.
Yeah,
Fills your tank
it does.
in a massive way. Where's your favourite place to go walk?
Oh, you know what? We went away to North Wales over the summer, and there was, I can't really say all the names, so I'm not going to really try, but I think it was called Betsy Coed or something. It's not spelt like that, is it?
No, but
that's how we say it. Yeah. That was really nice. And we found some reservoirs that were fun to walk around. It was just beautiful. And I mean, the sun was shining, so that always helps. But Betsy Coed seemed like a fun place to go back and explore a bit more as well. So, yeah.
You go back with I don't know if Jeff would be into this or not, but you can go up there and just do wild camping.
Yeah.
Is that not?
Not for me, no.
You need a hotel at the end of your nice walk in the mountains.
Yeah.
Okay. Don't just want to
I want a hot shower and a proper bathroom.
Okay. So we still like our creature comforts.
Yeah.
Okay. Fair play. So what does the future look like? What does growth look like?
Well, as you said, you end up getting more time as the kids get older. And I think that's it. Like they're growing up all the time and the transition happens quite quickly, actually. So I think finding what growth looks like, that changes quite a bit. But I guess where I want to be is I want to have a lot more time. Not that I can hang out in front of Netflix or something like that. But I think I would love to do more things for self-improvement. I've always kind of been that way. I want to read. I love reading to learn. I think if I could, I would have always been the eternal student. So I think that's fun and I think that also helps recharge me if I feel like I'm gaining something or my understanding of something is growing. So I think that would be nice. And I'm also really loving what's happening with Pod Junction. We were talking about that earlier, just seeing the growth in that as we're getting clients come on and what that looks like, what the process looks like, and how we're helping them and seeing them get off the ground, I think is really exciting. So more of that. Yeah.
It's it's interesting. You're right. Growth in time will be your big thing, and just finding some. I've found as my kids have got older, obviously the time that I have available has got bigger. And the thing that I just love to do, like you, is just sit and read and learn, and actually write.
Yeah,
all the things that I hated at school.
Yeah,
I'm like, all the things they made me do at school that I'm just like, what have I got? I just want to be outside playing. I now find great enjoyment.
Yeah,
which the irony is not lost on me.
Yeah. No, I get you. I'm the same. I used to have so many journals. But I find now that I can't, my handwriting isn't the same as it used to be. And my hand gets tired from writing because I could journal for hours. But now I'm like, I need something to type on. But it doesn't seem as personal.
No.
Like typing a journal out in, whatever platform you want to use, it just doesn't feel personal. So yeah, that's my dilemma.
I've found I journal 3 ways.
Okay.
And I've become okay with journaling 3 ways. It used to be that I was like, handwritten journal is the best. And I do think handwriting your journal is just amazing.
Yeah.
And I do like that. But sometimes I don't want to handwrite. I want to type because I can type a lot faster than I can handwrite. And so if there's stuff I just want to get out quickly, then maybe typing is the right thing to do. So then I started typing my journal and I thought, well, actually, I'm missing my handwritten journal. And then I eventually got to the point where I realized I was going back and forth, and I'm like, it doesn't actually have to be one or the other. It can be both.
Yeah, that's true.
And then the third way I've figured out how to journal was during COVID, you know, when because it was COVID, we did a lot of walking in COVID. It's like, I'm just going to go out for a walk. And I found if I put in my AirPods and opened up the app on the
like the notes recorder app.
Yeah, well, you just open up your notes app, but you could at the time. I mean, they've now got you can now just record straight into the voice recorder and it'll transcribe it. But back then, it was a few years ago, it would transcribe as you go along.
Okay.
So you would talk and it would try and figure out what you were saying.
Yeah.
So I would just put the headphones in. I would just walk around the park talking. And the reason I put headphones in was because so people didn't think I was crazy.
Yeah.
They just thought I was on the phone.
Tourette's.
Just kidding. They obviously thought I was on the phone. I was chatting away and I'd get quite animated and I'd talk. And then everything's just sort of typed up for you. And then you go, right, well, I'm going to cut out that bit because that doesn't make any kind of sense whatsoever. Because the way you talk is different to the way you write. And so I found the 3 different ways quite helpful.
Yeah.
And I never know what mood I'm going to be in. So I've always got my paper journal and pen and my special journal glasses because they have to be a certain strength for me to read what I'm actually writing. But they're slightly too strong for everything else.
Yeah.
I'm just at that weird age.
But that's interesting what you've said, actually. When you are typing, it's when you're dumping, isn't it? You just need to get something out. Whereas when you're journaling and you're handwriting it, you're processing things a lot more as you're writing. And I think that's helpful for that, isn't it? Yeah.
I've always found that you could take anything, any concept, any idea that you're wrestling with or trying to learn. And if you can communicate that in such a way as to teach it, not necessarily because you're an expert, but if you can put down on a piece of paper how you are currently understanding that topic, then that does really good things to your brain. Now, no one may ever read it. No one may ever hear what I've got to say about that. But if I sit there and think, how would I explain this to somebody? Then it helps my brain process in a way which creates deep understanding rather than a surface level. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? It's that's that kind of point. And it really helps with emotion as well. I'm feeling really angry, right? So hacked off with whoever. Never you, obviously, and never my wife. Let's pick on Keir Starmer because he's the Prime Minister. I am so hacked off with Keir Starmer right now. And I could write that in my journal, but it didn't really give me any understanding. Yeah. So to sit there and think, well, how would I explain this to somebody? It was like, well, I'm hacked off with him because of this. Now I'm starting to get, do you see what I mean?
Yeah, and it made me feel this way. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe actually if I think it through, he's right about this, but he's definitely wrong about that. Or, you know, and you stop feeling powerless. Yeah. And you start to understand the reason behind things. But it's not just about emotions. It's like, you know, you could take anything. Like I would sit there. I remember when we almost, you weren't working with us at the time, but when Jersey, the beauty company I had, we almost lost it overnight because the supply decided to, well, they changed their pricing policy, didn't they? The more you buy, the more you pay. And it almost put us out of business overnight. And I remember one of the things I decided to do was every morning I would go and sit for an hour and a half. While all this chaos was going on, I would go sit for an hour and a half in Costa, which was directly under our office. Not because I'm a Costa fan. I just want to point that out. But don't judge me. But it was just easy to go sit in there and I would write. And I would write. And I would write down what's going on and I'd try and write it in a way to explain it. And then I'd try and write it in a way to explain it. Like if I was talking to somebody else going through what I'm going through. Yeah. How would I advise them on what to do? That was such a helpful thing. It ended up being I ended up turning it into a book, which I've never published. But I gave to the staff to read at the time. And I thought, and actually a lot of good feedback on that because it really helped everybody sort of get re-envisioned and we went again, really. But that processing, trying to get deep, trying to understand, and the way it works for me is just to try and explain it to somebody. I find super helpful. Super, super helpful.
That's cool.
So top tip for you then.
Yeah, I'm going to try it.
Well, listen, I've thoroughly enjoyed this.
Thank you. It's been fun.
I've learned more about you today, which I'm definitely going to use for blackmail purposes.
Oh, great.
But thank you for that. Yeah, we did literally spring it on you, so well done.
Thank you.
Well, spur of the moment, didn't have a chance to think about anything. But yeah, if you're listening to the show and you're still with us, thank you for staying with us to the end of the podcast. It's been great to have this conversation. Obviously, make sure you like and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts from, because we've got some more great conversations coming up. And obviously, I don't want you to miss any of them. And I've realized we've not done the question. You know, like
the
we
one
have the
that you were,
question box, the random question box. So why don't you tell folks about show notes and websites?
Okay.
And then I'm going to go to AI and I'm going to find a question.
All right. So to get the show notes from this episode, you just need to head over to pushtobemore.com, and you can get access to everything there, plus links to the video, the audio, anything you need. And of course, if there's anything you want to reach out to us about, you can do that from the website as well. What else was there to say?
You're the producer.
And yeah, we would love your feedback. I don't know if you say this or not, Matt, but yeah, we would love to know what you guys think of the show, and if there's anything that you think we could do differently, we'd love to hear your input.
Yeah, absolutely. It's coming up with some questions, so I'm going to scan through them. So, well, okay, just give me I've asked for 10. Give me a number between 1 and 10.
8.
8. What's a question you think people in your field should be asking more often but rarely do?
What? Say that again.
What's a question you think people in your field should be asking more often but rarely do?
Okay, so podcasting. And the question that people should be asking more of is, is anyone listening? I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Is anyone listening?
No, I'm kidding.
Is anyone out there?
Is anyone out there? This is hard, actually, because doing what we do, we're asking these questions all the time, aren't we? So I'm hoping there isn't one that I'm leaving out.
No, but what I guess, what do you see other people, when you look at other people, what do you see that they're not asking that they probably should?
Right, okay. Could I market my business differently than the usual modes of marketing?
Yeah.
So I guess the question I want to hear is, can I use podcasting to market my business?
It's a good time
to grow my
today's
business.
show sponsor, by the way. But I think it's an interesting question, isn't it? Because you do see people. I think as maybe it's an age thing. As you get older, you start to develop axioms. You start to develop little principles that you live by. And in your field is an interesting question. What's the one question that people should ask but rarely do? Because I would my response to that question would actually be just to ask questions, because I don't think people do. People make statements. And I think in the advent of social media and the polarization of society right now, and the partisanship and all that sort of stuff, people are very good at making statements, but very, very bad at asking questions. And so we don't have the understanding that we need. We have the opinions that we think we should have.
That's a good point.
And I heard I don't know where I heard it from. I don't even know who I'd credit it, but opinions are like arseholes, aren't they? Everyone's got one.
Everyone's got one.
And so you're like,
yeah.
I just think broad macro, people have lost the art of asking questions. It seems to me to be, we have moved from questions to statements.
Yeah.
And if people don't hear us, we just make the statement louder. It's a bit like,
shouting for the person in the back.
Yeah, it's a bit like the English guy traveling, somewhere and going somewhere foreign, and they don't speak English. They do speak English, and they go, no. So you start to shout, that's going to make it easier, you know. But it's one of those where we just have stopped asking questions, I think, as a society generally. It's got a bit deep, this, hasn't it? But if I was to think about it more micro and I focus in, say, on podcasting, what's a question that people should ask but rarely do? I would say, something along the lines of like what you said, like an important question to ask would be, what is the best way to market my business? Mm-hmm. And it's not the silver bullet. Yeah. Right? In my opinion. And I think it's got to be around old school principles like telling stories, forming relationships, just being with people. Yeah. Heaven forbid, no one these days calls anybody. Everyone texts, don't they? But heaven forbid I call someone. But yeah, I'd say the same thing as you. Something along the lines of how do I market my business better, where I'm not trying to do it the same as everybody else. Yeah. I'm doing it in a way that makes sense for me. Yeah. That works for me, that works for my clients, connects with my clients and my ideal clients. So,
and actually tying that back to what you said earlier, a lot of people just do what everyone else is doing because they're not asking the question, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Just following along. And I think actually just asking simple questions, just ask a question, at the top of a piece of paper, back to your journal, write down the answer and see where it takes you. Yeah. Powerful times. So thank you for coming on to the show.
Thank you for having me, Matt.
It's been great. It's been great. Of course, if you'd like the notes, how do people reach you? How do they connect with you if they want to do that? I should ask this question. I've not got my usual notes with me, so I'm a little bit lost.
How to connect with me? Well, you could go to the website, pushtomemore.com, and send an email from there, just on the contact page, and that will come to me. Or you can find me on LinkedIn, and I can add that to the show notes.
But add that to the show. It's going to be weird, you editing and producing your own podcast. Are you one of these people that really doesn't like the sound of their own voice?
I was that person, but now I've just, I still don't like it, but I've just learned to block it out.
Got over it. You do this so many times, just like, I've just got over it. I say it doesn't bother me. But no, it's fascinating. Thank you. And obviously all the links to Sadaf will be in the show notes. Do reach out, do say how's it. And check out the website, pushtomemore.com. But that's it from us. If no one's told you yet today, obviously, you are awesome. Yes, you are. Created awesome. It's just a burden you have to bear. Sadaf has to bear it. I have to bear it. You have to bear it as well. Doing that thing with my hands again. You have to watch the video. But yes, so this show is produced by this person right here. There's also, I say, the wonderful team that makes this show possible is the Pod Junction team, which is, Sadaf heads that up, and all the other wonderful people around. So thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.